of crimson and amber, summer 105, July. They say that to give birth is to receive a gift, a wonder that not many will achieve. It is a moment in life where you will feel the pain of beauty, the beauty of sorrow, and the light of joy. It is a moment where once you look into the eyes of your child, you will see a universe staring back at you. To give birth is to give life, a new story to tell. It was a cold evening. The king and queen had invited those closest to their king to be amongst the first to gaze upon the newborns. What the king thought would be a wondrous event turned into something far from it. The crowd watched the two newborns peacefully slumbering in the cot. One began to murmur with much pity and disgust. His mouth stood agape. "Sire," the man said carefully, as he tried to converse with the already tired king, who sat with his hands in front of his mouth, clasping it together as he sat in silence within his own thoughts as he stared blankly. The man opened his mouth and spoke in a hushed and concerned tone, trying to convey reason, but also concerns regarding the people's worries. "The child has the markings of the Vira demon, sire. We cannot." But before he could finish his sentence, the king looked up towards him. His eyes were like fire, unable to be doused with water. With one eyebrow raised, he asked, "You too? I'm sorry, Bernard, but I think that such matters will not be brought up anymore, especially at this moment." Bernhard raised his eyebrows in reluctance as he added carefully, "The people are worried about their safety, sire. Tales of old have spoken of such infants bringing great chaos to this world with such markings. It is best, too." The king swiftly glanced in annoyance towards him, not wanting to hear any more of it. He chuckled subtly in annoyance as he replied, "Tales from an old grimoire, you mean?" The crowd glanced amongst each other. Some had scoffed looks on their faces as they found that the words that the king elicited were disrespectful to their faith. Marion, the king's wife, glanced towards Bernhard with her sleepless eyes and said tiredly, "Whatever the concern may be, the children's future is ours to decide. You may freely speak of concerns, yet it is still our decision on what we will do with them. Right now, they are not your concerns." "Yet," a woman dressed in silk and cotton interjected as she spoke with a mocking tone. Both the king, Bernhard, and Marion glanced towards her direction. Another woman retaliated and replied to the other, "You speak of uncertainty of the child's decisions, but who are you to decide what the royals should do with their children?" The crowd glanced towards the young woman, dressed in pink silk and white bordered cotton. The woman that spoke earlier turned towards the young woman and scoffed. "And who in the fuck may you be to question my own?" "Shush," the king said as he stood up and walked over towards the two. The woman turned and looked into the king's stern eyes before he ordered, "I have invited you here to see my children, not to argue on what I should do with my own goddamn children." His tone was harsh and stern. He then said, "You may either go or stay, but I will sew your mouth if you speak of it ever again." The woman stared blankly in pure surprise. The king's eyes were like the sun burning into stone. Feeling intimidated, the woman spoke again, pointing towards the discoloration on one of the infant's arms while she trembled. "My queen, I beg of you, it may be your children, but once you are buried under dirt and sand, it will be uncertain what the child would do herself." The king gritted his teeth in annoyance. "Woman, if you do not wish to see my children grow into adults, then I may ask you to leave the city at once, as I will not discard my children under my rule, nor will I lay my blade on her neck." The crowd began to murmur in discrepancies, all arguing on whose opinion they would stand behind. Bernhardt, one that began this debate, asked curiously, "And what if she were to be separated from her sister? Would that not bring your statement into question?" The crowd all glanced back towards the couple with a questioning glance. Both the king and Marian glanced up towards him in confusion, feeling both tired and frustrated with the constant nagging and nuisance that the people emitted. He shook his head dismissively, while he conjured up an answer that he hoped would satisfy their concerns. "My children have inherited good hearts, that I am sure of. And if the case would be true, then I can always have someone look over them." Even though he knew almost no one else than his own sister, whom had isolated herself due to familial pressure. The infants began to wail as they were pulled out of their slumber by the sounds of chatter. Marian sighed and glanced towards the king with a desperate look, without any words. The king nodded and stood up, patting down his attire as he requested the crowd to leave the room at once. "It has been enough. Please leave this estate. The maidens and servants will guide you towards the door. Those who have questions regarding the future of Atheris will be able to ask them at the Colosseum of Osiris tomorrow at 12. The crowd exchanged glances with each other before they all went out in unison. As they all exited one by one, he noticed that the woman from earlier stared at him with a furrowed gaze. He raised his eyebrow and mocked. "I have told you the terms. Your decision." The king glanced back and saw 3 people remaining within the room. Marian and the king raised their eyebrows in confusion as they glanced towards the young couple and Bernhardt. "I thought I was clear in my message. Was I not?" The young lad nodded subtly and said softly, "Yes, sire, you were. But I..." The young man paused before he continued. "My wife asks if she could be of any help with bringing up your children." The king shook his head and replied, "I have servants and maidens enough. It is kind, nonetheless." Marian picked up one of the infants and cradled her within her arms before she turned her eyes towards the king. "I really need it, Reynold. I trust that they mean no harm." The girl and the boy both exchanged glances while they waited on the king's response. The king turned to face Marian, seeing her desperate gaze while she nurtured her daughter. "I need someone to talk to. Someone not part of the royal houses," Marian pleaded. The king sighed, knowing that without help, he would be at a loss if he denied their request. Seeing that they were the only ones that did not seek to throw a knife into his heart. With a sigh of reluctance, he asked, "What value can you bring in the nurturing of my children? What could you bring that the maidens cannot?" The girl answered with a hushed tone, "I could help the queen with herself, helping the children. I don't mind whatever the task may be. I can read and I can write, and my family extends far into the past." The boy nodded and added, "I can also house her in times of uncertainty, if the folks raise their swords to you. It is safe and outside of the kingdom, and I'm sure that you are aware of the past protests. The king stood in silence, raising his hand to brush his prickly beard as he knew they were right. The barbarism of his own folk knew no limits, and time would just reveal the lengths they would go for their own interests. They would not stop till they get what they want. That the king knew. Marian glanced up towards the king with credence. "They are right. You have seen it, Reynold. I do not want to see my child on a spike," she said in a hushed voice. Reynold glanced back towards Marian in silence, before glancing down towards the child that was sucking ever so calmly on Marian's breast. With a sigh of reluctance, he nodded in favor. "But," Reynolds said before he continued, raising his index finger in the air, "this will not be spoken of. It has to be a secret." The king glanced back towards Bernhard, who stared subconsciously out of the window. His hands were resting on his back. "That regards you too, Bernhard," Reynolds said sternly. Bernhard glanced in surprise before he replied, "I see. I will keep my mouth shut, just for you." Reynolds could see him chuckle subtly and added, "I will feed you to the wolves myself if I ever come to hear that you spoke of it." Bernhard nodded, clasping his hands together like an innocent child that was punished for a misdemeanor. "Now, I spoke of the session that I will hold tomorrow at the Colosseum. If you have further questions, I will answer them there. Now I want you all to leave this estate." The young couple complied with the request without question and left the room. But just before the boy walked down the stairs, Reynolds gestured for them to return. "Wait, I have not come to know of your names yet." The two walked back up and stood next to each other before they answered with their hands clasped together. "My name is Julie," the girl answered politely with a bow. "And I am Henry. It is a pleasure." Reynolds gave a soft grin before he gestured with his head for them to exit. Bernhard followed suit, following the young couple closely, but before he closed the door, he glanced back towards the king and Marian and said with a low, groany voice, "Just be careful, my king. There are eyes everywhere."